In this movie, we're going to add a linked Revit file. There's lots of scenarios where you might choose to link one Revit project to another. Perhaps you are working on a multi-building project, or maybe you have multiple disciplines where you have mechanical and electrical and structural, and you're all working in the same building. Whatever the scenario might be, you can take one Revit project and link it into another Revit project. And in a similar fashion to the way it worked when we linked CAD files in a previous movie, if the original Revit file changes, you can go to Manage Links and select that file and simply reload it to see the latest changes. So I'm in a file here called Office Building, and I'm going to do a really simple example just to go through the mechanics of how to set up a linked file. I'm going to link in a small outbuilding. So I'm going to go to the Insert tab and click the Link Revit button. That brings up my exercise files folder, and I'm going to grab this shed file here. Now, if you watch the movie on linking CAD files, you may notice that at the bottom of the dialog, there's far fewer options than we had at that time. And that's because when you link to a Revit file, Revit already pretty much knows all that it needs to know about that file. It doesn't have to ask us a lot of questions about how we want to interpret the data coming in. The only question it really asks us is, where do we want to put it? So down here under positioning, we have all the standard options: center to center, origin to origin, manual placement, and so on. Now, in this case, I'm going to accept the default center to center, and I'm going to simply click Open. So you're going to see, of course, that center to center did just that, and it put the shed building right in the center of the screen, but now it's sitting right on top of my building. So there's a pretty good chance that that's not the location where I want that to go. So I'm going to come over here to try and select the shed building, but I have a new problem here, is that I can't seem to get that thing to select for some reason. Well, back in Chapter 2, we talked about selection toggles. And one of the selection toggles that we had available to us was the ability to turn off selection of linked files. And we used this in some of the previous movies, and so Revit remembers what your previous setting was for any of these selection toggles. Now, the two places you can find the selection toggles are, of course, at the lower right-hand corner of the screen on the status bar, and over here on the drop-down underneath the Modify tool. And you can see that Select Links is turned off here, and down here on the status bar, it has the small red X next to it. Now, you can click the toggle here, or you can check it there. It does exactly the same thing, but now that would allow me to select my outbuilding in order to move it. And you can move it very precisely, but in this case, I'm going to move it just a little bit randomly. I'm going to use my Move tool, click a base point and a new point, and I'll just put it out there for the time being. If you want to move yours a little more precisely, feel free to type in some dimensions. Now let's take a look at this in 3D. I'm going to click the default 3D view icon, and you can see the building sitting over here. And perhaps we wanted to make some modifications to that building. Now let me show you where this linked file shows up, first of all, in the project browser. So over here on the project browser, I'm going to scroll down to the bottom, and you'll see at the very bottom of the list, there's a Revit links item. And if we expand that out, you can see the shed building is listed right there with a small blue arrow next to it. The blue arrow indicates that that building is currently loaded. Now, there is a limitation with linked files in Revit whereby you cannot have both the host building, the office building in this case, and the linked building, the shed in this case, open at the same time in the same session of Revit. Now, just to be clear, they can both be open at the same time on two different Revits. So if you're working in one computer and your colleague is working in another computer, you can each be in a different building just fine. But on this Revit that I'm working in, I can't have both open at the same time. So if I tried to go to Open, select the shed, and click the Open button here, Revit will generate an error saying that I can't do that. But it will offer to unload the shed for me. So if I say yes, it will further warn me that I got to be sure because I can't undo that. I'm going to say, yeah, that's fine. Go ahead and click yes again. And you'll see that I'm now in the shed building. Now, what I'm going to do is just use my switch windows here on the quick access toolbar and jump back to the office building for a moment. Notice the shed disappears here. And down here on the project browser, it now has a big red X next to it. That's indicating for me that it's currently unloaded. So let's go back to the shed using the switch windows, and let's make a couple really obvious changes. Let me just roll my wheel to zoom in a little bit. I'm going to select this window. I'll copy it over in the middle here. I'll select this door, and I'll choose a larger size door, like maybe a double door like that. So those changes should both be very noticeable when we reload the file. Let's go to the big R. We'll choose Close. When it asks me if I want to save, I'll say yes. Now back here in my office building, the shed is still unloaded. So there's two ways I could reload it. I can use the Manage Links dialog, select it here, and click Reload, Or there's actually a shortcut to that. Let me cancel. If we just scroll down and look over here where it's X'd out, I can right-click instead and choose Reload. Now, you can do it either way. The result is the same. And if we zoom in, you can see that the updated version of the file is now available. So if you have multiple people working on different aspects of the building at the same time, linked files can be a really nice way to manage those different parts and pieces.